in the window, but I saw that they popped up on another screen I've got in the room. So I might have to ask you, Noreen, if you can forward me through any messages that come up, and then I can handle those at the end of the meeting. So we've got a bit to go through as we go through today's meeting. So let's jump in and start talking about some of the updates. But before we do that, let's just quickly talk about just some of the things that people need to know if they're not familiar with Microsoft 365 Business, because there's a lot to understand, and like we're constantly encountering people who may have some exposure or understanding of Office 365, but aren't quite sure where Microsoft 365 fits on top of that. So we'll go through and we'll cover off some of the basics, and then as we get towards the end of the meeting, that's where I'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of the different Microsoft 365 SKUs that are available, so that you can get an understanding of when and where you should be positioning the different offerings, when you should consider starting off with a certain one as the base versus looking at another one as the base offering. So let's jump into the overview. So if you aren't that familiar with Microsoft 365, probably the best way to start thinking about it is if you think about the evolution of Office. So back in the olden days, so this is going back quite a while, there was no such thing as Microsoft Office. Instead, you'd buy the standalone components, so things like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And then Microsoft introduced Office, and it kind of made the need to have those individual products not necessarily disappear, but more that it started making a lot more sense to get the bundle of components that you could start using from there. So once we start taking a look at what happened after that, Office kept getting additional capabilities, but then all of a sudden, Office 365 started to do a similar thing in terms of bringing in that core Office functionality. But all of a sudden, Office was just one of the components. And instead, the other components were technologies like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and what at the time was Link Server. But now we've gone to the next iteration of that, which is effectively we've gotten to the point now where Office 365 is now the component of another suite, and that suite is Microsoft 365. So this is just one of the, I guess, just another step in the evolution of how Microsoft provides licenses, how they provision user functionality, etc. So the important thing here is we'll spend a bit of time talking about what these additional advanced security and device management capabilities are that we're starting to add in. So starting off with what is Microsoft 365 Business. So just some of the high-level capabilities here. So in terms of the version of Office that's built in, it comes with a base of Office 365 Business Premium. So if you're familiar with the capabilities of Office 365 Business Premium, you're really off to a good start in terms of the additional capabilities that's included. As we start working through and take a look at some of the other bits that we do start getting added here, we start getting capabilities such as Exchange Online archiving added into the mix. So previously that would have been an add-on that we'd have to go through and purchase separately to something like Office 365 Business, or even the initial release of Microsoft 365 Business. It wasn't something that was included. We would have had to go out separately and do it. So some of the benefits of this is, as we go through, we can start getting the latest version of Office out to these users. Now, this is something that's becoming more and more important. If you've got customers who are still running Office 2010 or earlier, that's rapidly approaching end of support, along with Windows 7. So trying to get people onto a common platform and using Office and Windows as one of those bases is really a step in the right direction. As we start looking at the advanced security capabilities, we'll talk about some of these things in a bit more detail as we go through. But Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, so it scans and replaces, if necessary, things like file attachments that are coming through. So it scans them for malicious code, it scans them for malicious URLs, it scans email for malicious URLs, and then we'll effectively go through and verify those as they're coming through to make sure that they're not like phishing attacks or anything else that are fairly common types of ways of trying to get inside an organization today. One of the important things, and it's another thing we'll talk a bit more about as we go through some of the updates, multi-factor authentication. So trying to get organizations used to the concept of using multi-factor authentication. Now, there are some things in play already to make sure that administrative-based authentication is coming through for your global admins, etc. So there are some extra things that will make it easier, or more, I guess, sort of more moving it towards a requirement that is really going to help the security of certain organizations. Then we also start looking at some of the ways we can use Microsoft 365 Business to start enforcing some of those Windows 10 security settings. So things like Defender, Exploit Guard, or enabling BitLocker. When we start looking at some of the internal data leak prevention, the one that we'll come back to a bit later because of some of the updates is Azure Information Protection. Now, just quickly, at the bottom of that column, you'll see the upgrade from Windows 7 Pro or Windows 8.1 Pro to Windows 10 Pro. It shouldn't say add no additional cost. It should be, I keep missing that. It should be at no additional cost. So effectively what we get here is the ability to go through and upgrade those Windows 7 Pro or later devices up to Windows 10. So the same way that we can use the license to get our version of Office upgraded, this allows us to get that base Windows image that our machine has already got up onto a standard version. Now, the important part of this conversation around the Windows side, and it's a question that does come up quite a bit, is is this an upgrade from Windows 10 Home to Windows 10 Pro? And no, it's not an upgrade from Home to Pro. It's an upgrade from an earlier version of Pro to Windows 10 Pro. And one of the ways that I try to position that to people is it's giving SMB customers an opportunity to move to Windows 10 Pro if for some reason they chose not to take advantage of upgrading their Windows 7 or 8 Pro devices up to Windows 10 during that free upgrade period. Now, finally, moving on to the device management piece. We've got Microsoft Intune included. We've got additional single sign-on benefits over and above what an Office license would include. And then we've got a whole host of tools included that we can start wrapping around things like Intune to start giving us better out-of-box setup experiences for new devices, different ways of getting applications deployed out to users as well. And I'll talk about some of the things that are going to be very important for smaller organizations or organizations that may be somewhat bandwidth constrained, about how there have been quite a few changes and a few more changes to come that will really help you streamline and optimize those environments where bandwidth is going to be problematic for an ongoing period. Here we've just got 4 different scenarios around who would be the types of people you might be talking to about moving to Microsoft 365 Business. So some of those scenarios, if we start at the top, working with customers who may have already started looking at Office 365 or who may have Office 365, but realize that they need additional capabilities around security and device management. For people who've looked at components of EMS, if they've looked at Intune, if they've looked at some of the Azure Active Directory capabilities, these might be people that it's worth getting them to have a look at Microsoft 365 Business as well. Now, once we get to situations where it might be someone with Exchange Online Plan 1, for example, so someone who said, look, all we want is a mailbox in the cloud. Well, now it's probably time to have a conversation around what else can we start integrating with that mailbox you've got in the cloud? Can we integrate it with Microsoft Teams? Can we integrate it with SharePoint? Can we integrate it with other technologies? Do you need subscription versions of Office? Because those old versions of Office you've got may stop talking to online services at some point soon if they're not updated. And then that leads into the 4th option, which is people who've got Office Perpetual. So the example in here is someone running Office 2010 on a Windows 7 Pro device. So we've got a lot of different end-of support opportunities coming up on the Microsoft side over the next year or so. So I guess just to sort of do a little bit of a detour for those of you who aren't aware, over the next few months, end of support is approaching for SQL Server 2008 and SQL Server 2008 R2. But then in January of next year, so January 2020, that's where Office 2010, Windows 7 Pro, Windows Server 2008 and Windows Server 2008 R2, and I think there's a couple of other things alongside those, they all reach end of support. So this is one of those chances you get when it's time to go in and look at what needs to be replaced. Is it something where we can look at doing it a different way this time, perhaps with Microsoft 365-based solutions? As we look at the different ways that partners can work with Microsoft 365 Business, there are going to be several steps either through the development of your organization or the advancement of the requirements of your customers in terms of what do they need to really start taking advantage of the additional capabilities that are included. Now, if we start off at stage one, some of the important things there is that a lot of the time when we look at what happens when someone deploys Microsoft 365 or Office 365, we find that their mailbox will get migrated. They'll get Office deployed onto the desktops or the laptops, etc. But from that point on, the enabling of additional functionality doesn't really seem to go anywhere very quickly until there's some kind of absolute requirement for something. So we normally suggest enabling some of the pieces that are going to be the easier conversations to have to begin with. As we move on to stage two, well, now some of the things that we've got here in stage two are actually becoming a bit more urgent than they may have been previously. So things like rolling out Windows 10. We've got, so if they were previously Windows 7 customers, we need to get them across to Windows 10. If they were new organizations, one of the things that you'll see in here is introduce Teams. Well, this is actually something where this slide needs to be updated because for new, and it's something we cover in more detail a bit later, but Teams has replaced Skype for Business in new Microsoft 365 deployments of 250 seats or less. So it's important to understand that if you are expecting to see Skype when you do it, or Skype for Business when you're doing a new deployment today, then Skype won't actually be available as the back-end service. And they're also starting to shift over to deploying Teams as part of that standard Office desktop. But again, that's something that we'll loop back around to. Now, once we get to that third stage, this is where we start digging in and looking at, okay, how do we start enabling some of these additional capabilities around security and compliance? Some of the customer engagements you have, if they're being driven by some kind of exploit that was able to get through their network, if it's something where it's a high risk activity, a high risk environment that the organization is in, you might find that some of these things start getting enabled a little bit earlier on. So you might look at some of these things and go, oh, this is just stuff we do as part of our standard rollout. So this is just suggestions. It's not a template you absolutely have to follow, because the skills you've got and the requirements of your customers are also going to be the things that really do drive how these conversations do proceed. So let's jump in now and talk about what's new in Microsoft 365 Business. Now, some of these will be things that are fairly specific to Microsoft 365 Business, but other parts of them are things that it picks up because of updates to the underlying components of Microsoft 365 Business. So while we will continue to see additional things lighting up inside of that are additional features to Microsoft 365 Business, it's always going to keep getting additional updates because Teams, Word, Excel, etc., they get features on the desktop. We'll see, Exchange will get additional capabilities. We'll see Intune get additional capabilities. So what I've done here is just hand select some of the important ones that I think it's worth knowing about for you. So the ones that I'm focusing on here are mostly around the management and the deployment side, rather than around anything that the end user will see. These are more things that will allow you to work in different or better ways when it's time to migrate customers or deploy them. So let's jump in and take a look. So this is one that I've mentioned already, which is Teams is now, or is starting to be deployed by default by Microsoft 365 Business. So late last year, Microsoft made the announcement that within a short time period that any new tenant that was being spun up that had 250 seats or less, by default would have Teams and not Skype for Business. Now, this is something that for most SMB environments, like most people in that space don't even know that Skype for Business is something that's a thing. If you say Skype for Business, they'll go, oh, Skype, I've already got that. That was installed as part of my PC. So With Skype for Business, it disappearing in the SMB space a bit more aggressively than it disappears in mid-market or enterprise, not really something that is really going to make or break it for smaller customers. It just means that we can steer them towards Teams a little bit more easily. So previously, some of the guidance that I would have provided was either to go through and use Intune to deploy the Win32 or the MSI-based version of the Teams client, or alternatively to go through and, if someone wanted to do it manually, that was also an option. But in a larger option, you want to step back from doing it manually. So the screenshot I've got there is just using the Intune console to go out and do an automated deployment that targets a certain group of users or devices in the organization. But this is something that you won't really have to do for much longer if you are already doing it, because as I said, it's just something that's going to be rolled out by default when you do deploy Office as part of or through Intune, or even just doing an install from the web. It will go through and install that for you. So that's a pretty big improvement and a nice simple change that can make a bit of a difference when it comes to deployment. Now, this is the continuation of the ongoing story of Azure Active Directory functionality that was only available in Azure Active Directory Premium that has started to roll into Microsoft 365 Business. So earlier today, I was specifically asking one of the members of the Microsoft 365 Business team, what am I allowed to say? What am I not allowed to say? So I shouldn't get into any trouble for anything that comes up here. So that team would really like to be able to say you get full Azure Active Directory Premium P1 included as part of Microsoft 365 Business. At the moment, the Azure Active Directory team is saying, get the customer data to us, get the partner feedback to us, just so that we've got something that we can, like when people say, why are you including the full thing? Now, this is one of those things, it's a conversation that's been going on for a long time. It seems to be progressing, but until it shows up and you see a product announcement, don't sort of put any time frame on it or expect that it's going to be something that happens instantaneously. So that's one that you'll probably hear a bit of noise about when it does happen, because there are a few elements of Azure Active Directory Premium that people are still wishing were part of this as opposed to it being the subset. But for now, this is another huge improvement, because what we get with the self-service password reset is we can go through and use Azure Active Directory with multi-factor authentication enabled to go through and do our cloud-based password change or password reset and have that written back into our on-prem Active Directory environment. So that means that we can really simplify that whole password reset policy. So if someone's in the office or out of the office, it's going to be a pretty simple process for them to go through and do that, even if they've forgotten their previous password. Now, there is a little bit of work involved in getting this set up. It won't take too long, but one of them is that you'll need to go through and just reconfigure Azure Active Directory. And in the screenshot that you can see here, it's listing password writeback as something that you will need to enable. Now, that's step one. The other part that you need to do is go through and just change some object properties in Active Directory so that something that previously would have had read access to something like passwords for hash purposes has now got the right ability. So that's something where you have to go through those additional steps manually so that you are aware of what you're doing in that environment. Now, the other big plus of getting something like this enabled, or even in a pure cloud environment, of enabling self-service password reset for users, is it means that they need to, once they need to enroll for that, they're effectively enrolling for multi-factor authentication at the same time. So as more multi-factor authentication options start lighting up for those users, it means that they're pre-enrolled, they've got their authenticator app set up, or they've got their mobile phone enrolled if they need to receive SMS notifications, etc. So effectively, we can do a little bit of the heavy lifting around user and device enrollment before some of this stuff starts becoming, stuff that everyone sort of knows it's a good idea to do this. All of a sudden, it will start becoming, we don't have a choice. There are just too many different types of password attacks out there that we can't rely on not having multi-factor authentication. So that's the perfect tie-in into the next slide. So things that we'll start to see rolled in. So I've already mentioned that there'll be some capabilities that we still don't get from Azure Active Directory Premium for a while. And one of those is the full conditional access capabilities, where we've got a huge ability to start controlling the types of apps and policies and permissions and what might trigger certain behaviors around requiring users to go through an MFA prompt or not go through an MFA prompt. But to get the ball rolling, some of the things that have started lighting up already, the first one is if you take a look in Azure Active Directory, you'll find that you do get access to the require MFA for admins preview policy. So what this does when you enable it is you can set it up, or by default when you enable it, global admins, SharePoint admins, Exchange admins, conditional access admins, and security admins don't get a choice. They have to respond to MFA. So that's something that is already in preview. Right now, it's not enforced, but over time, you'll start finding that this is something that will go from something where Microsoft suggests you turn it on to something where Microsoft will turn it on by default in new tenants. And if you don't want it turned on, you'll have to switch back. Now, you can go through and exclude certain users from that. So if there's someone that for some reason is in a situation where they can't use multi-factor authentication, you can always create exceptions, but the general idea is try to create as few exceptions as possible. Now, the other thing that's coming, so this isn't something that you'll see light up in preview just yet in the portal, is the user side of a default baseline policy. So in this case, the users will need to will have MFA enabled. They'll need to enroll in the Microsoft Authenticator app. They'll need, that if any kind of risky sign-in is seen, an MFA prompt will be triggered. Things like legacy authentication protocols will be blocked. So this means that if someone's still using an old mail client somewhere, and it may even just be an old mail client on their phone or something that doesn't support modern authentication methods, this is one of those things that will start limiting the risk to the organization. Now, the reason why blocking legacy authentication protocols is important is that they generally don't support any kind of industry standard multi-factor authentication. So they're kind of something that's being used as a little bit of a backdoor because people are just basically trying to brute force those. So once it gets to the point, if it thinks based on some unusual activity that the user has been compromised, it will go through and block those logins for them. Now, just to go back to what I was saying on the previous slide around some of the things that the Microsoft 365 business team is working with the Azure Active Directory team, is they want the Microsoft 365 business team really wants to have full conditional access capabilities available to you. So effectively, if you've got Azure Active Directory Premium P1, they want you users of Microsoft 365 Business to see those same exact features. But for now, this is what's officially coming. But those other ones, it's really a matter of stay tuned. No guarantees of timing. But trust me, when it's something that happens, everyone will be making a bit of noise about that one because it's very heavily requested. Now, some of the other changes that also came through towards the end of last year, even down on the Office 365, when we're installing Office 365 Business onto the desktop, there are a few changes that started sneaking through probably from around the September or a little bit earlier timeframe onwards. And the first one there was things like Azure Information Protection and labeling capabilities and rights management effectively being baked into the Microsoft 365, the Office 365 Business client. Now, effectively what this means is that instead of going, you've got something based on Office 365 Business, you don't have the back-end services. Instead, what happens is Office will query your subscription to see what capabilities you've got, and then it will start lighting up the appropriate features for you. So the ones that you can see here, so if we sort of go through the screenshots from left to right, the first one is just to show that this is Office 365 Business. Now, once we go into, we stay in that backstage view, you can see that we've got set permissions. So effectively, we're using Azure Rights Management or Information Rights Management or Azure Information Protection, depending on what you're more comfortable calling it. So that's something that is now effectively just baked into Office. Now, the final screenshot there on the far in the right bottom hand corner is just showing a screenshot of within Outlook. And what you'll see that I've got down at the bottom there is you can see that there's an online archive. So that means that rather than having to jump out to the web browser to look at online archives, well, remember that adding an online archive license is great. It's a great start. But telling people that they have to jump into a web browser to take a look at anything isn't really, something that most people are too happy about. If they want to use Outlook, they want to use Outlook. So what this means is that, previously, to get this functionality, you would have had to go all the way up to Office 365 Pro Plus, which might have been a bit of overkill for people. Now, there are also conversations around that this team is having, and they're working with engineering to see what they can do about enabling shared computer activation for Office 365 business. Now, there are a couple of reasons why they want to do that. So most people would sort of be leaning towards remote desktop services, but it's actually a little bit different to that. And the reason why they want to go down that path is they want to make sure that with the Microsoft virtual desktop options that will be becoming available in Azure, they want to make sure that people who've got Microsoft 365 business licenses can also run their productivity apps up in a service like that instead of being told, sorry, you have to have Office 365 Pro Plus. Now, the final piece here is it's not something that we're seeing with the automatic deployments from the Microsoft 365 business team yet, but the guidance that's coming out of the Office team and the Microsoft 365 teams in general is, as you're doing your upgrades or your deployments out to new versions of Office, seriously consider moving over to 64-bit Office rather than staying on 32-bit. Now, obviously, this isn't something that you can just go without taking into account the impact that it's going to have on existing line of business applications that may integrate with it. There may be some custom extensions in Office. There may be some scripts, etc., that you need to run. But generally speaking, a lot of the compat issues, if people have gone version to version, a lot of those things shouldn't be too much of a problem. Now, it's not to say they won't be a problem because, until you go in and audit the customer environment, you won't know what's there. But that's something that even like when you're thinking about new installations, et cetera, where people don't have any real ties to legacy plugins or add-ins, it might also be something that you want to think about when it comes to deploying Office out to Microsoft 365 business customers. So just a couple of quick ones over on the Microsoft multi-factor authentication app. Microsoft has introduced passwordless sign-in, and just on that, the two screenshots. The first screenshot is what you'd see in the app or the web browser. So it pops up with a number saying, open up the Authenticator app and choose the right number, and then you'll get the notification on your mobile device, and then you choose the one of those three that matches what's there. So that way you can go through and do that. So just to get people used to the idea that we shouldn't have to be typing passwords in over and over again. Now, the second one I've got listed here, which is the Microsoft Authenticator app in use across multiple devices. This is a huge one for people like Microsoft partners who have to manage multiple customer environments. You've got multiple people managing the same customer environment. You don't want someone to have to send a notification to someone else's device or to a shared mailbox or something along those lines. So now we start getting a bit more flexibility here around how we do this. So this is something that was only introduced, this pretty much went live when we were doing the Cinex Roadshow late last year. So this was a pretty recent set of functionality to be added in here. A couple more things here that are important to discuss. So one of them is some of the enhancements to Windows 10 delivery optimization. Now, I won't go through everything that's in that list on the right-hand side, but this is something that's incredibly controllable. And the idea here is that if we've got multiple clients on the same network that need to bring down the same updates, we really should be leveraging the capabilities that they've got to do peer distribution. So let's take advantage of your high-performing network as opposed to take advantage of your internet connection. So as you take a look through some of those different settings, you can get an idea that there's quite a few things that we can start doing in there. But before we jump into any specifics, let's just work through the list on the left of what it will do peer distribution of at this point in time. So your Windows 10 cumulative updates, your feature updates, I forgot to put in things like your Defender updates, any driver updates that go out through Windows Update, your Microsoft Store apps. So they're things that it's been doing for a while. So no real surprises there. But once we get to the bottom four, things like updates that need to go out to Office 365 Business on a monthly basis. So whether we're talking about Office feature updates or security updates, they can also benefit from delivery optimization. With Intune, if we're using it to deploy MSI files or Win32 apps, they'll also benefit from that. And now the final one at the bottom, this is a big one, Office 365 Business fresh installs. So if you think about setting this up and you're thinking it's approximately 1.2, 1.3 gig per PC if we're doing an Office install from the web. Previously, people would have said, okay, I'll bite the bullet and I'll set up some kind of internal distribution point. And it's not something you really want to do, but in some cases you may have had to do it. So what you can do now is start pushing out these new installs and have it start picking up from local devices rather than just pulling everything down from the internet. So what you need to do in different environments, and you'll find that Microsoft has got some general guidelines around their recommendations, is tweak the settings that make sense for your for that network environment. So there'll be some that that you look at and go, I'm not too sure what they are. I'd better take a look at the documentation. But effectively, it means we can start getting pretty good control over what comes down from the internet versus what comes locally. Now, we can't do it on a file-by-file basis or an update-by-update basis. It's more a matter of what happens here is that Windows Update for Business is effectively, keeping an eye on the IP address that the requests are coming from, and if it sees that a request comes through for something that it knows has already been sent down to that externally facing IP address, it effectively will tell the client, check your local network to see if it's there. Now, some of the challenges that you've got with this is if it's an environment where machines are coming and going, someone might be doing an update at home and bringing the laptop into the office, or they might be upgrading it at work and then taking the laptop out of the office. So people are trying to find things that aren't available any longer on the network, so they may have to go back from that location or from the internet location. But what you can see at the top of this list here, it's not available just yet, but it's showing up in current preview builds of Windows 10, is the cache server option. So effectively, you could start getting a bit more aggressive in terms of hold content for longer, set aside more storage for this purpose. So if you've got something that's running 24 hours a day, for example, there's a lot of questions that haven't been answered about this. Is it just going to be a virtual machine that you install as a virtual appliance, for example? But it's the kind of thing where Microsoft realizes that doing just pure, client-based peer-to-peer goes a long way to solving a lot of people's problems. But there are going to be situations where instead of it being distributed caching, where if we could sort of at least get, maybe one device on that network segment that can also do things a little bit more aggressively to try to make sure that when machine 2 comes online, that even if machine 1 is offline, that cache may still be there. So just another thing on this before we do continue on, I specifically didn't include anything around updates to autopilot here in today's session, but but all of this ties into things like autopilot as well. So if we're doing a brand new machine setup on the corporate network and machines have been receiving regular updates, or someone's already done an install of Office recently, that means that as we go through that autopilot experience and we're setting up that new PC from scratch, any of the updates it needs, any of the new drivers it needs, if you're installing Office, any Microsoft Store apps, etc., these are all things that there's a good chance it's going to be able to get some, if not all of those files from the on-prem environment. So if you think about not just it freeing up your internet connection, but just the performance improvement in terms of setting some of these things up. So it's definitely starting to push things in the right direction for making cloud-based deployments much more real than they've been previously. So we're moving on and switching gears a little bit now just to talk about which Microsoft 365 license is right for your customer. Well, this is one of those things where unless someone sort of comes to you with specific information, the answer is always going to be, it depends. So let's work through how to determine how to get from it depends to here's what's important for you. So you'll see some tables like this or some slides like this where they tell you here are the features that you need. As if you need these, and you need to look at these SKUs. Now, I normally find ones like this a bit confusing because I'm not quite sure where I'm supposed to look. And even though I can read everything that's on here, it's kind of a bit of a messy way to do it. So the ones that I much prefer, I'll start with the type that I do prefer, which is something nice and simple, which is, in this case, we're comparing one thing against another thing. So in this case, the thing that we're doing the comparison against is Office 365 Business Premium. Now, the reason why this is a good one to start with is if we think about Microsoft 365 Business building on top of Office 365 Business Premium, it means that as we move from Office 365 to Microsoft 365, everything that we've got moves forward with us. So there's no, whoops, that skipped ahead a little bit too early. Let me go back. So if we take a look here at the things that are different as we start looking down towards the bottom here, it's that simplified device setup, it's device management, it's the additional security capabilities through components that aren't normally included with an Office 365 business subscription. So we start getting a lot of additional functionality included with Microsoft 365 Business over and above what we're getting with our standard Office 365 Business Premium plan. So if someone is already in the Office 365 Business Premium world and they're looking at some of these additional capabilities, for me, the natural place to start is with Microsoft 365 Business as the starting point for the conversation. And I'd be sticking with that as the solution until they suggest or raise a requirement that maybe is a little bit outside of what Microsoft 365 Business can do. Now, once we get to that stage, this is where things start getting a bit uglier. So I could have kept this a bit simpler by getting rid of Office 365 Business Premium because we just saw that Microsoft 365 Business is a superset of that. But things get a little bit different here because we start having things included as part of Microsoft 365 Business. And in one case, you'll see here that Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, around halfway down the page in blue, that's available as part of Microsoft 365 Business, but it's not part of Microsoft 365 E3. That means it's not part of Office 365 E3. So you'll notice that I've deliberately kept Office 365 E3 out of this because we're not doing an Office-to-Office comparison. We're doing a Microsoft 365 Business to Microsoft 365 Enterprise comparison. So what's important to note here is if we look at the pricing around Microsoft 365 Business versus Microsoft 365 E3, it's about a $14 difference. Once we jump up to E5, well, it's over double the price of Microsoft 365 Business. So what's important to note is that we can still, mix and match and add, a lot of the different things that make up an E5. We can still go through and add a lot of those into Microsoft 365 Business if we want. It starts getting to the point where you sort of look at it and go, well, how much am I paying for Microsoft 365 Business plus one or two add-ons versus what is it going to cost to perhaps start with a different base? And in a lot of cases, Microsoft 365 Business might still be a better option for you because of some of the extra things that it does include by default, including the simplified admin experience versus what we'd see in an enterprise license. Now, there's a lot of details in this slide, so don't stress too much about all of the details. It's something where if you do have questions about which one is going to be a better fit for certain types of customers, we can cover some of that during the Q&A, or alternatively, after the call, speaking with your Synnex reps, they'll be able to give you a lot of that information. So let's move on now and just cover up a couple of quick resources and a promotion that's in market right now. So you'll get copies of these slides. These will be made available to you very shortly. So we'll get the recording posted, and we'll get the slides, a PDF of the slides available for you so that you've got the resource. So there's the Microsoft SMB Tech Community up on Microsoft Tech Community. Another one that's important, and this is one that I really strongly suggest you take note of, is the Microsoft 365 Business Service description. So this lists the functionality that's included with Microsoft 365 Business. So it sort of pulls out what it's taking from different Office and Intune and Azure Active Directory, and what it's bringing together and what it provides you there. Now, there's a broader Microsoft campaign called the Microsoft 365 Scholarship Program. Microsoft's got some tools to help you identify the right solution and create some proposals for customer offers. There's a guided product tour, and there's also a licensing deck. Now, this content goes, they do have to go through and refresh it occasionally, as you can imagine, because as you've seen here, quite a few things have changed over the last few months. So this is something where they do go through and update this content quite regularly. Now, just as the final slide, a promotion that Cenex is running at the moment is the Rugby World Cup promo, and that's running in market until the end of June. So all products that are going through CSP, there'll be 5 winners selected to go to Japan. You get return flights, accommodation. I might have to see if I'm really nice, see if I can get invited along to that, because I've only ever been to airports in Japan. I've never been into the country. So if they let me into a country, that would be absolutely wonderful. So hopefully someone from Cenex is listening right now. Nudge, nudge. No, I can't do that. So that's it for the slides. So just to sort of leave this up here, and I'll check email to see what Q&A messages may have been sent through. So I can't see anything yet. So Noreen, if there's anything in the Q&A window, for some reason mine is showing up as nothing, even though I know things are, or at least something has been posted in there. But yeah, I'm not seeing anything on mine. So I'm not quite sure what's happening, but yeah, if I could get you to send those through, or alternatively, I'll do something unusual, something normally that I'd sort of I'd shudder at. We could open up for interactive conversations. Hi, Noreen.
Hi, Mark. I was just going to say there's no questions in the chat window at the moment, so.
Oh, okay. So I guess if you do want to unmute yourself, that might actually make it a little bit easier to manage. So if you want to unmute yourself and just ask a question, if you've got any questions, please do that, because we've still got 15 minutes or so to go through things if you do want to spend a bit more time on anything in particular. I think this is the first time everyone's been quiet. It's not even a Monday. Okay, well, if there are no questions, I'll end the recording now.
Excuse me, Mark. There is a question that just came through from Joe. Okay. He's asking you to please explain Skype in Microsoft 365.
Sorry, please explain.
Skype.
Oh, okay, Skype. Yep. Okay, so right now with Microsoft 365 Business, or any new Microsoft 365 / Office 365 deployment of 250 seats or less, Skype for Business isn't being rolled out as part of that. It's only for larger organizations. So over time, that will be something where new deployments of Skype for Business online for enterprise customers will also be something that starts getting wound back, with a shift over to using Teams for that functionality. Now, on the reason why it's kind of an easy decision to do it down in the SMB space to begin with is because Skype for Business has never had market penetration down in that space because of the requirements that were in place when it was an on-prem product. It was something where you didn't just drop in a Skype server. There was a lot of moving pieces that you had to put in place. So it sort of being something that gets phased out faster in this segment makes sense, because it getting phased out faster doesn't really impact that many organizations. Okay, hopefully that answered the question. If not, please feel free to ask a follow-up.
We've got another question from Glenn William. He's asking, is Microsoft replacing Skype with Teams?
So Skype for Business, effectively, it's in a transition period now where, so there'll still be like Skype for Business on-prem technologies that we'll still continue to see for a while. But in terms of, it being a platform with active development in the cloud, that's already started shifting across to Teams. Okay, so just in a weird twist, seeing that we're talking about Teams, I'm seeing the notifications for Teams pop-ups on one screen, but in the chat window, I'm not actually seeing anything pop up there. So I'm actually seeing a few things. So there's so now I know if I watch the second screen, I can see that. So with the question that just came up, which was, can it communicate with internal and external clients? So effectively there, if you've got the ability to do things like federation, or allowing like anyone else who's using Teams or Skype for Business online, it's really easy to go through, add those users to your list, depending on how the organization wants to, how much the organizations want to integrate with each other versus individual users. You do have a bit of flexibility there. Now, when it comes to integrating with third-party services, some of the things that you'll find there is that effectively Skype for Business over the years, some of the external connectors that used to be there, it doesn't have anymore because they just weren't being used, or the way that you could connect into some of the third-party chat solutions, some of those methods started closing up. Now, examples of some of the things that are from memory that it could talk to in the past, things like Yahoo Messenger. It used to be able to talk to MSN Messenger, but it can't do that. It can communicate with consumer Skype, but you can still connect to some additional external options if you've got on-prem Skype for Business. But Skype for Business in the cloud, that wouldn't give you those same external options for things outside of the Teams / Skype for Business world. Okay, any other questions? Oh yeah, so Anita on the password sync back to on-prem, that's in there now, so that should work. That was kind of quietly rolled in probably October, November timeframe, but I don't think they really spoke about it until December, January. I think they just wanted to make sure that it had rolled out to the majority of tenants before they made the announcement around that. Yeah, so now you've got a project to do, I can tell. See, I'm smart sometimes. Not always, just sometimes. Okay, well, we'll give another minute for Q&A. If anyone does have something, type away, and I should, as long as I look in the right place, I will see it for a short time period. Okay, so is 32-bit Office going to be replaced anytime soon? Instead of saying yes or no, how about I say you can still get 32-bit Windows after all these years of 64-bit Windows effectively becoming the de facto standard. So it's not going to disappear anytime soon because there are going to be people who, for whatever reason, can't move to it, can't move to 64-bit. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. So even right now, the this is going to conversations from this morning, that team isn't even considering changing the default from 32-bit to 64-bit, whereas the enterprise team, like that's basically their agenda is get people across. For the M365 team, the M365 business team, at some point, I'm sure they might give you an option, but they don't have any kind of timeline yet for switching over to 64-bit. Okay, so haven't had anything pop up in the last minute or two. So with that, I'll stop the recording and thank everyone for joining us. But I'll stay here if anyone does have anything. I'll just sort of keep an eye on that window for a few more minutes just to make sure I'm not missing anything. But thank you very much, everyone. And if you've got any follow-up items, please reach out to. Oh, I just saw another question. I'll loop back into that one. So I'll just finish up the spiel. If you've got any follow-up questions, please reach out to Cinex, and if it's something that they need to reach out for me for, they can do that. Now, one of the questions that just popped up was around Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. So just one of the things to be wary, to sort of be clear with here is that there are, with Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, so the advanced threat protection, that's not part of Microsoft 365 Business. That's part of the Microsoft 365 E5 or the Windows 10 E5 license. So it's one of those things that for some reason I don't really understand. It's not something we can buy as a separate add-on license on its own. So the way to sort of think about Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection is it builds on I guess there's kind of three tiers. We've got just the baked-in Defender that we get with Windows. So effectively, it's the same underlying engine. But then once we move to Microsoft 365 Business, we've got the ability to manage that engine. So we can set centralized policies that will go through and make sure that we've got the appropriate security settings and your machines are getting updates, etc. Now, once we move up beyond that, that's where we're getting into Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. So that's where all of a sudden we start getting not just the being able to push management settings out, but we also now start getting the ability to start reporting back in, getting a centralized console, doing remediation, kicking off automated remediation tasks, setting up machine groups for management purposes. So there's a lot of additional stuff that we can do once we do get up into Windows Defender ATP. And this is another conversation that I've had with people on the Windows Defender ATP side, asking, is there, what are the chances where even if we don't get the full functionality of Windows Defender ATP, could we at least get a dashboard where we see the reporting capability? Even if it's just reporting without us really being able to take any actions. So that's something that, like right now, I don't think it's the number one priority because they're really, for this team, the big pushes they're making with different teams are the Office shared computer activation and the trying to get conditional access completely unlocked in the product. So they're the two key focus areas for now. But obviously, once they unlock certain achievements, there'll be new achievements they want to attain, and I'll be pushing really hard for the Windows Defender ATP. Whenever I sort of am in front of the right people, that's the hill that I'll die on. That's the one that I'll keep fighting for. So hopefully that makes a bit more sense. Okay, so I'll finish the recording now. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. It's 4 p.m., so hopefully you don't have too much of it left. And we'll be doing these webinars over the next month, so you should have the link to see what we've got coming up. So thank you for joining, and look forward to having you on next time we run one. So thank you, and thank you, Noreen.